Hey guys, I'm Volcano Style, and welcome to the long overdue episode 1 of Untwisting the Trees DX. Much like the original series, we're going to start with the most basic information and talk through the map. Now, before we get into the bulk of this episode, I have to start with a disclaimer of sorts. The new Twisted Tree Line, or the Shadow Isles as some have taken to calling it, is still in the beta phase, and as a result there's a good chance that some of the information in this video may eventually become outdated. I would have released this video earlier in the month until Riot changed the map to remove the central speed boost and I had to rewrite the script. For all I know, by the time this video goes up, the speed boost could be back again. If changes are made, I'll add annotations to this video with corrections, but please keep in mind that certain specifics such as gold and statistic values of creep camps and item builds may change over time. But since Riot has given no concrete date for when Twisted Tree Line is going to be out of beta, I think I've delayed this series long enough. Now then, let's talk about the map. I'm going to try and juggle talking about the map layout for the sake of those watching who've never played Twisted Tree Line before, whilst also pointing out the differences from the old Twisted Tree Line and how this has generally affected the game. I'll try not to focus too heavily on a map that doesn't actually exist anymore, but it goes without saying that a remake of this scale has definitely altered the game at large, and it's only right that I point out all the tips and tricks that don't exist anymore. Twisted Tree Line is a smaller map than Summoner's Rift, consisting of 2 snaking lanes with 2 towers each, one at the base defending an inhibitor and another close to the base entrance. The structure of the lanes are very similar to how they were in the original Twisted Tree Line. The top lane has a more pronounced curve than bot lane, and like its predecessor has 2 patches of brush connected to the wall above the jungle at the centre of the lane. The gap between your turret and the enemy turret is rather significant, meaning that in the event of a fight that doesn't go in your favour, it's a long walk to retreat from the centre or on the enemy's side. There are 4 passageways to and from the top lane. 2 passageways down to the jungle either side of the turret, the one in front guarded by a patch of brush, and 1 more towards the centre of the lane leading to Vilemore. You'll notice the top jungle has been removed entirely, so there's very little reason to actually take this route other than a gank passage. Top lane has also gained 2 additional passageways to the centre, leading directly towards the altars and jungle camps, making it more mirrored to bot lane. Bot lane is mostly similar to its old self, but has a few changes. While the singular brush remains at the map's centre, it's been moved to the top of the lane rather than the bottom. Like top lane, there are 2 passageways to the jungle either side of the turret, and a further passageway either side of the central brush, although this passageway is more vertical than diagonal, leading more towards the central jungle brush and the ghost relic. The passageway leading to the altar is also covered in brush, making even travelling to your own altar a potentially risky gambit. The central jungle was the most drastically changed and, well, I suppose it's just the jungle now. The circular brush with the rock has been removed, as has red buff. The central jungle is now a more open space and houses 1 key objective and 3 jungle camps. The jungle camps are static now, not randomized, so say goodbye to our good friends in the tri-camp. The top jungle camp houses golems, the inner jungle camp is for wolves, and the outer jungle camp is wraiths. There are no buff camps anymore, no rabid wolf, no lizard, and sadly no ghast. Twisted Tree Line jungle creeps have been brought in line with the Summoner's Rift jungle creeps that they're an equivalent to, both in terms of difficulty and gold. Jungle creeps will first spawn at 1 minute 40 seconds and respawn every 50 seconds after they're killed. The Wraith camp is both the weakest camp and the most defensively positioned, so it's only right that it be worth the least gold and XP values of the 3. This is typically where your jungle route will begin if you don't plan on either invading or preparing for an invade yourself. Afterwards, you'll typically head towards the wolf camp. Wolves are slightly trickier and worth slightly more gold and experience, but are positioned so that you're a prime target if the enemy happens to be waiting in the central brush, which is why they're usually kept until second. Finally, Golem camp tends to be the camp that, much like on Summoner's Rift, unless I'm playing a single target high sustain jungle, I'll actually ignore on my first run through. They pack a punch and are pretty tanky in the early game, and since Wraiths and Wolves will be enough to get me to level 2, I'll usually try and get a gank started before returning to the respawned race. They're still worth a respectable amount of gold and experience, but don't be surprised or adverse to your top lane taking them because of that fact. Be wary that because of the curve of the golem camp, the fog of war is a bit awkward, so be prepared to be ganked while doing golems without as much vision as you thought you had. On the topic of spawn times, do note that minions spawn earlier than they do on Summoner's Rift at 1 minute and 15 seconds, and will meet at approximately a few seconds before jungle camps spawn. Since a full creep wave is enough to get a champion to level 2, be wary of getting there in time to get the experience if you do plan on giving your jungler some cover or extra DPS, and be wary of not being ganked on the way up. You don't really need Smite to do the jungle camps, and it's my personal preference to have a second Exhaust or Ignite, but if you're really looking to get levels really quickly and plan on doing Vilemore at some point, then by all means. It's my personal preference not to though. At the centre of the map, in a passageway between the jungles, is the Ghost Relic. The Ghost Relic is a regenerative buff that restores a flat amount of hit points based on level, a percentage of mana or applicable energy resource, and briefly boosts the speed of the target who picks it up for a few seconds. The Ghost Relic spawns at 1 minute 55 seconds and respawns every 90 seconds. You'll find a lot of mid-map skirmishes, especially ones where one party is likely to die, will be decided on who grabs the relic first, either the would-be escapee or the chaser. A notable change to the central jungle is that the walls have been widened. While some gaps can be flashed over or jumped over by certain long-range blinks and dashes, some walls have been made wide enough to specifically remove this style of play from Twisted Treeline. Most of the time you'll find yourself more cutting corners than jumping the whole wall. Right now, the only champion capable of jumping from Ghost Relic into top lane is Kassadin, and I can only assume that's not something Riot wants, so abuse it while it lasts, I guess. On the topic of walls, the long-awaited home base remake has arrived as well. The base has been made more spacious, and while the Nexus still occupies the outside of the base, the enemy team can no longer backdoor by flashing or jumping over the wall directly to the Nexus, Pantheon being a notable exception. However, on the defensive front, the Summoner platform has been made its own actual platform, with 2 sets of stairs leading up to it from 2 different sides. A wall has been placed around the majority of the platform, finally putting to rest the old issue of kiting super creeps into the fountain and turtling until the end of time. So you can take inhibitors without being afraid now. The wall's also a narrow one, so it can be jumped as a defending team to get straight back into the action if you have a blink. The final element of the central jungle, and indeed what is now the most crucial element of Twisted Treeline itself, are the altars. Now, the inclusion of altars are a controversial point, and I'm not going to get into that this episode, but it's safe to say that the altars are the key objective on the new Twisted Treeline, and it's convenient then that both are in a position that both lanes can get to them promptly. Altars are large platforms with 2 diagonal walls at the side, with the top entry point perfectly parallel to the passageway leading to top lane. At the start of the game, both altars will be neutral, grant vision to both teams, and be locked until the 3-minute mark. Once altars are unlocked, they're ready to be captured. To capture an altar, you have to just stand on it, and you can move freely and cast spells as you wish. Once an altar is captured for your team, every teammate will gain 80 gold and the altar will be locked. Captured altars will only be locked for 90 seconds though, the duration remaining shown by the glowing ring around the diameter depleting. When your team is in possession of one altar, every unit killed will grant an additional 3 gold. Naturally, this is valuable during the laning phase, so do be sure to capture your own altar at the very least when altars unlock. However, if you're able to seize control of both altars, then your team will gain an additional buff, increasing attack damage and ability power by 10%, in addition to the 3 extra gold per kill, which the enemy team will then lose. You'll keep this buff until you lose the second altar. Altars will capture faster if you have multiple teammates standing upon the same altar, but this also has the drawback of providing the enemy with a bunched up number of targets, so be wary of whether a faster cap is essential, or whether it's worth a teammate staying in the central brush to scout or counter gank. Also, any damage taken while standing upon an altar will freeze the capture rate for a few seconds. If an altar is left before the capture is complete, the capture bar will slowly begin to reset by itself, so you don't have to stand on an altar that's only been half captured to get it back. A handy trick, particularly for capturing an enemy's altar behind enemy lines, is that recalling will not affect the capture rate in any way, so it's possible to sync your recall for the exact moment the altar locks. Finally, there's Vilemore, who spawns at the 10-minute mark at the cave at the top of the map. Vilemore is the super boss of Twisted Treeline, equivalent to Baron Nashor or Ebonmore of all 3v3, whose skeleton can be seen decorating the floor. Vilemore has inherited the Crest of Crushing Wrath buff from our deceased scaly predecessor, only it's slightly different. Crest of Crushing Wrath now grants the health and mana resource regeneration of Baron, with the attack speed and cooldown reduction of Rabid Wolf buff. The buff lasts for 2 minutes and is lost upon death. One thing to be wary of is that Vilemore is a lot harder than Ebonmore, and will take either one really fed bruiser or an entire team to defeat. All of Vilemore's attacks strike in an AoE, and every tick of damage reduces both armor and magic resist by half a point, stacking up to 60 times each, which, as you've probably guessed, is 30 armor and MR, which is a lot. He hits like a freight train and has a lot of HP to back it up, so with the debuffs and damage, be very careful that you're not going to be assaulted by the enemy team while you're vulnerable like this. Killing Vilemore will grant your team 194 gold each and will respawn every 5 minutes. This is just my personal opinion, but Vilemore is a rather low priority target, who tends to only be considered by teams who are already ahead and just looking to secure their lead, mostly due to the difficulty and risk of taking him. The vast majority of games I have, I rarely see him attempted, let alone taken, since most prefer just to push or look for kills, or quite simply they just don't want to leave their altars undefended. To each their own. The point is, 5-minute solo dragons aren't a thing anymore. Now that we've been through the map, I'm just going to briefly talk you through both the obvious and the unseen. The map is a lot smaller, the distance between the lanes is very short, and given the decreased number of objectives to control, map mobility is crucial. Fights will happen, and they will happen a lot. 1v1 skirmishes can turn into 3v3 slaloms in a heartbeat, and keeping track of where the enemy is at all times is reliant on you just as much as your team. Keep one eye on that minimap at all times. The key reason being that wards are not a thing on Twisted Treeline. You cannot purchase wards. The most you can hope for is a Shaco or a Maokai or a Teemo, whose traps are made visible by Hextech Sweeper and Grez's Spectral Lantern anyway. That name sounds familiar. Other consumable changes include the elixirs being replaced by Ichus, more expensive but more potent equivalents. Also take note that some items from Summoner's Rift, most notably Warmogs, Guardian Angel and Deathcap, are not available here. Liandry's Torment is also replaced by the Blackfire Torch, which quite frankly has had the recipe and stats changed on it so many times since October I'm not even going to tell you what it does other than percentile DOT. It might not even do that in a month. The main two items to keep in mind are Spectral Lantern for junglers, which is for all intents and purposes Wriggle's Lantern but with a close range clairvoyance in exchange for a ward, and Woogle's Witch Cap, an AP endgame item made of 2 blasting wands and a chain vest to offer both AP, armor, a percentile AP increase, and the active of Zhonya's Hourglass. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Like we've come full circle. A ring, you could say. Again, these 2 items have been changed since launch as well, so be prepared for the past minute or so to be made completely redundant. Another thing to note about Twisted Treeline is that it was designed with fights in mind, and fights mean spell casting. A big problem of the old Twisted Treeline was that the lack of blue buff kind of made AP picks a bit risky as far as covering their resources went. Well, that's not a problem anymore. For all intents and purposes, everyone is Vhagar with a chalice. Even Vhagar. Again. Anyway, your champion's mana regeneration will increase by 1.5% for every 1% mana you're missing, up to 150% increase when your mana is completely empty. In addition, at the start of the game you start with 825 gold, which is enough for boots and a Doran's item, boots and a flask and 3 health potions, a Philostone and 3 health potions, a Vamp Scepter, whatever you want to suit the champ you're playing and the role you're playing them in. Naturally, this is going to make playing around champs you typically exhaust the mana bars all a little more difficult, but it also removes the apprehension of picking a mana-intensive champion yourself. If you play someone who has Grail as a core item in their build, you're never going to see that blue bar run dry. Finally, the thing you need to keep track of in Twisted Treeline is death timers. In the early half of the game, death timers are very short, and a lot of the time you'll find that even when you have a fight that goes perfectly in your favour, you might not even have the time to cap an altar. Now, at 22 minutes, Twisted Treeline enters sudden death mode, which means that out of nowhere death timers will practically double. This might be a good thing if you're a snowbally team who's already ahead, but if you're in an equal game where you're suddenly a bit apprehensive about going in for fights, keep the timer in mind. Once it goes into sudden death mode, deaths will start to matter again. So that's the new map. It's a lot simplified and streamlined compared to old Twisted Treeline, but changes like the mana regeneration and altars add a new layer of nuance and complexity that the old map didn't have. Whether you think it needed that nuance in the first place is a matter of debate the forums have already been flooded with, and I made my contribution to that mess when the map was brand new. I think the changes they've made since then have gone a long way in improving the state of the map, and I hope they continue to do so, preferably without making this series pointless in the process. You know, throw me a bone, Riot. Join me next time when I break down how these changes have affected the shift of the metagame, or indeed if they have at all. I'm Volcano Style, and thanks for watching.